I was 28, working my third year as a senior air hostess for Transglobal Airways. I'd grown used to chaos, crying babies, drunk businessmen, and passengers who seemed to enjoy pushing my patience to the edge. But nothing in my experience could prepare me for the terror of Flight 777. It was a red-eye from Los Angeles to Tokyo, nearly full. The passengers were a mix of tourists, executives, and families seeking the comfort of sleep. Everything seemed normal as I helped people with luggage and guided them to their seats. Then I saw him. He wasn't in the window seat or the aisle. He was in row 9, middle seat, dressed in an old-fashioned black suit that didn't belong in 2025. He was pale, unnaturally so, with eyes that seemed too large for his face. And he was staring at me. I felt it immediately, a chill crawling up my spine, like someone had pressed an icy hand against my neck. When I smiled politely and introduced myself, he tilted his head, almost amused. "Ah, the one who smiles too much," he said, voice smooth, slow, with a cadence that didn't belong to any human language I'd heard. Something about his tone. It wasn't just unsettling. It made the hairs on my arms rise, made my stomach twist in fear and anticipation. I moved on, dismissing it as nerves, but every time I passed down that aisle, I caught him staring. Not just staring, watching, waiting. About 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed strange things. The cabin lights flickered as I passed his row. A cold draft trailed him, though the air conditioning was steady. Then passengers began whispering. A businessman in row 11 shouted suddenly, pointing at the man. "Did you see that?" he yelled. He's floating." I froze, thinking it was a hallucination, until I saw it myself. His body lifted a few inches above the seat, just enough to make the fabric of the chair crumple unnaturally beneath him. He grinned, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. The other passengers gasped. Some cried. The man laughed, a low, chilling sound that reverberated through the cabin. I wanted to move, to reassure the passengers, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. He was staring straight at me now. I realized the truth. He wasn't just frightening. He was obsessed. As the flight continued, things worsened. Passengers began feeling strange dizziness, nausea, and sudden panic. Lights flickered, oxygen masks dropped briefly, and some reported hearing whispers from empty aisles. But I could only focus on him. Every time I moved near the middle cabin, he appeared closer than he should have been, almost like he was gliding instead of walking. And every time, his eyes locked on mine. I asked the captain to check on him, but nothing appeared wrong. "Just a passenger with motion sickness," he said. I didn't believe it. That night, he began speaking to me directly. "You're mine," he whispered as I handed him a drink. "I've watched you for so long." "Excuse me," I stammered. He smiled faintly, almost tenderly, and leaned closer. The scent of decay filled my senses, sour and metallic, like blood mixed with rot. My skin crawled. "I will have you," he said softly. "Soon." I stumbled away, shaking, but the terror wasn't just his words, it was the weight of them. The passengers were beginning to panic. Those who looked at him sometimes went silent, transfixed, or screamed suddenly for no apparent reason. About an hour in, the supernatural became undeniable. Cabin lights went out completely for 10 seconds. In the darkness, screams erupted as passengers clawed at seats, panicked at unseen threats. When the lights returned, the man was gone from his seat. I couldn't find him anywhere. Not in the aisle, not in the lavatory, not among passengers. And then, he appeared behind me. I spun around. He was hovering, inches off the floor, his black coat fluttering unnaturally. His eyes glowed faint red. "You cannot escape me," he said, voice layered, impossible to locate in space. You belong to me." I screamed, and the nearby passengers flinched as if they could sense the entity clinging to me. The air grew cold. I could see my breath. I could see the passengers' hair moving as if invisible hands were brushing against them. I realized he was feeding on fear, growing stronger as the panic spread. Father Donovan, yes, once again a priest happened to be aboard, though this one was younger, wiry, and clearly not expecting combat, saw the danger immediately. He grabbed a small silver cross from around his neck. "You cannot fight him alone," he said. "I'll help you." The man laughed softly, circling me, gliding above the aisle. "Help her?" he asked mockingly. "Oh, this will be fun." Suddenly, his form elongated, arms stretched impossibly, fingers curling like claw. His face twisted in a grin that seemed to split his skull in half. Passengers screamed as shadows slithered along the walls, dark tendrils reaching toward seats. Father Donovan began chanting, voice growing louder. Each word seemed to push back the shadows, but the man was relentless. He lunged at me, and I felt his presence like a hand pressing against my chest, trying to suffocate me, not physically, but spiritually. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, desperate. I swung, and it passed through him, hitting nothing. He laughed, high-pitched and cruel. "You amuse me," he said, "but soon you will scream my name." By now, the cabin was in chaos. Passengers clawed at one another. Shadows moved along the walls, creeping across seats, hands reaching out with elongated fingers. A mother in row 14 screamed as her child vanished, then reappeared a second later, eyes black, silent, staring straight at the supernatural passenger. The temperature dropped. Ice formed along the windows. The plane groaned under unnatural forces, as though bending around the entity's will. I realized then, he didn't just want me. He wanted to destroy everything around me, to heighten my terror, to feed his pleasure on my fear. Father Donovan and I cornered him near the rear of the plane. He hovered above the aisle, a monstrous figure twisting impossibly, his eyes glowing, his mouth splitting inhumanly. "Now, you belong to me," he shouted. Donovan raised his cross. "I command you to leave this vessel," he shrieked, a sound that rattled metal and broke glass, and the shadows recoiled. For a moment, he faltered. I stepped forward, clutching a small vial of holy water the priest handed me. I threw it toward him. It hissed like acid as it touched him, and he shrieked in fury. Smoke and darkness poured from his body, writhing violently. The shadows disappeared, as if drawn back into him. With a final chant from Father Donovan, he was sucked upward toward the ceiling and vanished with a scream that seemed to echo through the steel fuselage. The plane lurched violently, then stabilized. The plane landed safely in Tokyo, passengers shaken but alive. Many refused to speak of what they saw, claiming stress and hallucinations. But I knew the truth. One of our passengers had been more than human, more than mortal, and he had fixated on me, on my fear. Even now, nights later, I still feel his gaze. I see shadows curling in corners, hear faint whispers that should not exist. He is out there, somewhere, waiting for another flight, another opportunity. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear him laughing, soft and cruel, calling my name, promising that next time, he will not let me escape.
Now that you know what happened there, let me tell you about another chilling encounter.
I was 28, working as a senior air hostess for Aerostar Airlines. I'd seen strange things in airports: drunken passengers, lost children, people screaming at baggage claims. But nothing prepared me for what happened after Flight 842 from Mumbai to New Delhi. It was a routine flight, nearly full, with families, businessmen, and tourists. One of the passengers that caught my attention was a small boy, no more than 7 or 8, traveling with his grandmother. He was quiet, pale, and unnervingly still during the entire flight. He hardly spoke, only watching me from his seat every time I passed down the aisle. As the plane began its descent, he raised a small hand and called me over. "For you," he said softly, holding out a small package. I smiled and crouched beside his seat. "For me? Thank you. What is it?" The boy's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "A doll," he said. "It will keep you company." I laughed lightly, assuming it was an innocent gift. I took the package and thanked him, tucking it into my bag without thinking much of it. When I got home later that night, I opened it. It was a small doll, no taller than my hand. Its face was painted crudely, eyes wide and staring, lips thin and red. Its tiny dress was faded, stitched haphazardly, and it smelled faintly of smoke and earth. A shiver ran down my spine, but I dismissed it. "It's just a kid's toy," I whispered to myself. I put it on my bedside table and went to sleep. I woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of soft giggling. Blinking awake, I scanned my room. The doll sat on the table, just as I'd left it. Its painted eyes seemed to glimmer in the moonlight, unnaturally bright. "Probably the wind," I muttered. My apartment was on the 14th floor. There was no wind, but the giggling continued, faint and high-pitched. I froze. The doll's head had turned slightly toward me. I swear it had moved. Heart pounding, I grabbed it and put it back in the drawer. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought I saw it peeking out from under the bed, sitting on the chair, or even hanging from the ceiling. By morning, I was exhausted, but I chalked it up to stress and fatigue from the flight. The next day, I returned to work, trying to dismiss the doll from my mind. But as soon as I entered the airport, a familiar dread settled over me. I walked past the check-in counter, and for a split second, I thought I saw the doll sitting on a luggage cart, staring at me. I blinked, and it was gone. During the flight that evening, things escalated. The boy from the previous day was on the plane again, alone this time. He smiled at me, holding another small package. I froze, refusing the gift, but he whispered, "You should have played with it. You should have kept it." Panic clawed at my throat. I didn't know what he meant, but the unease was undeniable. Later that night, at home, I began seeing shadows flickering in my apartment, shapes that moved just beyond the edge of vision. The doll was on the table, facing me now, its head tilted unnaturally, and I could swear it smiled. I tried burning it, but the fire fizzled as if it were wet. I tried throwing it into a river, but the next morning it was back on my bedside table. Days passed, and my life became a blur of terror and paranoia. I began seeing the doll everywhere, in airport lounges, on buses, in my reflection at home. It seemed to move closer each day. Its painted eyes followed me, and faint whispers floated in the corners of my ears. The shadows grew bolder. At home, objects moved on their own, doors slamming, chairs sliding, lights flickering. And then the doll began speaking. "You're mine," it whispered, voice childlike but warped, echoing unnaturally. "You can't hide. You can't run." I called the airline security, thinking someone was playing a prank. But CCTV footage showed nothing unusual. No doll, no child, no one moving objects. I was alone. Sleep became impossible. I began seeing the boy's face in unexpected places, on flight monitors, in airport reflections, even in the sky outside my window. He was always smiling, always watching, always waiting. One night, after finishing a late flight, I returned to the airport to retrieve my bag. And there he was, the boy standing in the terminal, motionless. But it wasn't just a child anymore. His eyes glowed faint red, and his body seemed slightly taller, unnaturally rigid. "Come with me," he whispered. "It's time." I ran, heart hammering, pushing past travelers who stared at me, unable to see him. He followed silently, step by step, until I ducked behind a luggage carousel. But when I looked again, he was gone. I thought I had escaped, but the whispers followed me home, growing louder each night. The doll appeared in new positions, sometimes lying on my pillow, sometimes sitting on my kitchen counter, always staring at me. One night, I awoke to the room drenched in shadow. The doll was hovering above me, its tiny body levitating. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, a shriek that sounded like hundreds of children screaming at once, filling my ears. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My phone, lying on the table, showed a message I hadn't typed. "You belong to me now." The doll lunged at me, not physically, but the sensation was real, as if invisible hands pressed against my chest, trying to pull me into it. I felt a cold, gnawing terror that seemed to seep into my bones. I blacked out. I contacted Father Malhotra, a local exorcist I had met on a previous flight. He came immediately, carrying holy water, incense, and charms. "Airborne or grounded, spirits follow where attachment exists," he said. "This doll is not innocent. It's a vessel for something malevolent." He tried performing a ritual at my apartment, chanting and sprinkling holy water. The doll writhed, its tiny body twisting impossibly, emitting a high-pitched laugh that made the walls vibrate. "You must let it go," Father Malhotra said, exhausted. "Destroy the doll completely, or it will consume you." I carried the doll to a remote abandoned warehouse, determined to end the nightmare. As I approached the fire pit, I felt a presence behind me, cold, watching. The boy appeared again, floating in the shadows, taller and more menacing than ever. His voice echoed in my mind. "You can't get rid of me," he whispered. "You're mine." I threw the doll into the flames. It writhed, screeched, and for a moment the boy screamed too, a distorted, otherworldly sound that made me stagger. Then everything went silent. The fire consumed the doll entirely. The boy vanished, leaving only a faint chill in the air. I returned home, trembling, exhausted, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Even weeks later, I sometimes saw a shadow in the corner of my eye, or felt a cold presence on the plane. I know the boy isn't entirely gone. I know the doll was only a vessel, a link to something dark that will wait, patient, for another opportunity. And I know, deep down, that the next time I see a small, pale child handing me a gift, I will not take it, because some gifts aren't meant to be opened.
Now that you know what happened there, let me tell you about another chilling encounter.
When I was 29, I'd already spent nearly a decade in the skies. Most people think of flight attendants, or air hostesses as many still called us, as smiling faces who hand out drinks and peanuts. But for those of us who've lived it, the job is something else entirely. Constant vigilance, balancing customer service with safety, and learning to read people in seconds. I loved the sky. There was something sacred about it, something untouchable. The endless horizon. The shimmering lights of cities below, the way clouds swallowed us whole. The sky had always been my escape, until the night of Flight 237. It was an ordinary assignment, London to Madrid, a quick 2-hour hop in a Boeing 737. I'd flown that route dozens of times, but from the moment I saw the crew manifest, I had a sinking feeling. The captain that night was Marcus Hale. Marcus was a legend in the airline, nearly 20 years flying, with the kind of calm composure people admired. He was tall, square-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair that gave him a distinguished look. He had a dry humor that made younger crew members nervous, but I'd flown with him before and always felt reassured by his presence. But that night, when I stepped into the crew lounge and greeted him, he wasn't the man I remembered. He was pale, the skin under his eyes bruised with sleeplessness. His hands trembled as he scrawled notes across his clipboard. When I smiled and said, "Evening, Captain," he looked up, and for a second, I swear, I didn't recognize him. His eyes were wrong, bloodshot, glassy, as though he'd been crying or staring into darkness too long. "Evening," he muttered, voice flat. No spark, no humor, just emptiness. I told myself he was tired. Pilots often were. But when I walked away, I felt a cold shiver trail down my spine. The passengers boarded in waves. Businessmen with laptops, families wrangling kids, tourists with cameras slung around their necks. My job was routine: smile, guide, reassure. But one passenger caught my attention immediately. He was in his 60s, dressed simply in a black suit. He carried no luggage, just a worn leather bag and a small Bible tucked under his arm. A thin silver cross glinted at his collar. When I greeted him, he gave me a nod, his eyes warm but searching, like he wasn't just looking at me, but through me. "Good evening, Father," I said, smiling politely. "Good evening, child," he replied, his voice low, steady. Then, leaning slightly closer, he added something strange. "Be vigilant tonight. Darkness rides in unexpected places." I froze. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Was it a joke? A warning? But before I could ask, he moved down the aisle, sliding into his seat near the middle of the plane. As we prepared for takeoff, an unease hung over me I couldn't explain. Maybe it was Captain Hale's empty stare. Maybe it was Father Gabriel's cryptic words. Maybe it was nothing at all. But when the doors closed, sealing us into that aluminum tube hurtling toward the heavens, the unease grew claws. During safety checks, I glanced into the cockpit. Marcus sat rigid, lips moving as if reciting something under his breath. Not checklists, something else. His co-pilot, Daniels, kept shooting him nervous looks. The hair on my arms prickled. The engines roared and the Boeing 737 surged down the runway. The force pushed me back, my heart thumping with the familiar rhythm of acceleration. Normally, I loved this moment, the rising, the breaking free from Earth. But as we lifted into the night sky, I couldn't shake the sense that we weren't climbing into freedom this time. We were climbing into something else. The climb out was smooth at first. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow as we leveled off, and passengers settled into the rhythm of the flight. Laptops opened, drinks were ordered, children pressed their faces against the windows to watch the shrinking city lights below. To anyone else, it was just another flight, but I could feel it. The tension, the way the air itself felt heavy. I went through the motions, pushing the service cart down the aisle, plastering on a smile, but my chest was tight. Something was wrong. About 30 minutes into the flight, the intercom crackled. Normally, Captain Hale's announcements were precise and professional, the kind of voice that made passengers feel safe. This time, his words crawled over my skin. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You can relax now. There's nothing to fear, nothing at all. We're going exactly where we need to go." A few passengers chuckled awkwardly. Some frowned. It wasn't what you said, it was how you said it. His voice was low, almost mocking, drawn out like he was savoring every word. When I caught First Officer Daniels leaving the cockpit to use the lavatory a few minutes later, I cornered him near the galley. "Is the captain all right?" I whispered. Daniels looked pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. He glanced around before leaning closer. "He keeps talking to himself," he muttered. I asked him about flight vectors, and he didn't even answer me, just kept staring at the horizon and muttering. "I don't know what's going on." Before I could press further, he added in a strained voice, "And his hands. He isn't flying the plane. He just rests them on his lap. But the aircraft, it moves like something else is guiding it." His words turned my stomach cold. Not long after, the plane lurched violently. Drinks spilled, passengers gasped, overhead bins rattled. I gripped the cart, heart hammering. I darted to a window seat to glance outside. The sky was clear, no clouds, no storms, nothing. The turbulence had no reason to exist. Another jolt hit, harder this time. People screamed. A baby started wailing. And then the intercom crackled again. Captain Hale's voice, slow and deliberate. "Stay seated. Stay calm. The sky hungers tonight." My skin went ice cold. That wasn't a slip of the tongue. That wasn't fatigue. That was madness. In the midst of the chaos, I saw Father Gabriel rise from his seat. Most passengers stayed strapped in, clutching their armrests, but he moved with deliberate calm. He approached me in the aisle, placing a hand on my arm. "You feel it too, don't you?" he asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. He leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "The man at the controls is no longer alone. Something has entered him. Something ancient. I've seen this before." My heart thudded painfully. "What do you mean entered him?" "The body is flesh. The spirit is clay. Both can be shaped, stolen, corrupted. That thing in your cockpit is not just your captain anymore." I stared at him, horrified. I wanted to dismiss it as the ramblings of a religious man. But deep down, I knew he was right. I'd seen Marcus Hale before. He wasn't this. Whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged nervous glances, sensing the strangeness even if they couldn't name it. A businessman demanded answers from me. A mother clutched her child, eyes wide with panic. And then something worse happened. The lights flickered, plunging us into darkness for a full 3 seconds before buzzing back to life. In that moment, as my eyes adjusted, I swear I saw shapes moving down the shadows taller than any human, thin and elongated, gliding between seats. When the lights returned, nothing was there, but several passengers gasped, swearing they'd seen something too. Father Gabriel closed his eyes, whispering in Latin, gripping the silver cross at his chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could hear was my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Then it came, the sound that froze my blood. Through the intercom, low and guttural, came laughter. Not Captain Hale's laughter, but something deeper, layered, like multiple voices shrieking and chuckling at once. The passengers fell silent, terror spreading like wildfire. I looked at Father Gabriel, who opened his eyes slowly, his face grim. "It's begun," he said. "My training told me to stay calm, to reassure passengers, to make everything look routine. But there was no routine here, not when the captain's laughter, if it even was him, still echoed through the intercom like an infection crawling under ever skin. I had to know what was happening in the cockpit. I approached the locked cockpit door, my legs trembling. The metallic hum of the plane felt louder, heavier, as though even the aircraft itself didn't want me there. "Are you sure you want to go in?" Father Gabriel asked softly behind me. I have to," I whispered. I pressed the intercom button to request entry. Normally, Captain Hale would buzz me in. This time, there was silence. Then, click, the lock released on its own. My throat tightened. I pushed the door open. The glow of instruments lit the cramped space in eerie green and red hues. The first thing I noticed was Daniels, the co-pilot, his face drenched in sweat, hands gripping the controls but barely moving them. His eyes flicked toward me, wide with panic. And then I looked at Marcus Hale. He sat rigid in the captain's seat, both hands resting in his lap. His head was tilted slightly back, his mouth half open, lips moving in a silent chant. But it was his eyes. God, his eyes. They weren't just bloodshot now. They glowed faintly, a sickly yellow, like embers hidden beneath ash. "Captain?" My voice cracked. Slowly, his head turned toward me. His neck moved too far, unnaturally, the tendons stretching like he was made of rubber. "You shouldn't be here," he said, except it wasn't his voice. It was deeper, layered, like two people speaking at once, one human, one monstrous. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe. Daniel shouted, his voice shaking. He's not flying the plane. I've got no control either. It's like the aircraft doesn't even respond to me anymore." I looked at the controls. The yokes shifted on their own, twitching as though guided by invisible hands. Lights on the panel flickered, warnings blaring and silencing at random. The plane was flying itself. Captain Hale raised his hands slowly, fingers curling into a claw-like shape. His lips kept moving, whispering words that weren't English. The sound made my stomach churn, like the syllables themselves weren't meant for human ears. "Captain, please, stop," I begged. He smiled, revealing teeth stained black as if rotting from the inside out. "You will all join me," the voices said in unison. "Blood for blood. The sky demands it." Suddenly, the windshield darkened. Not clouds, not weather. It was as though a curtain of shadow slid across the glass. I couldn't see stars, couldn't see ground. Only swirling darkness pressing against us like ink in water. Daniels panicked, pulling at controls, flipping switches. "Nothing works. Oh God, we're not even on the radar anymore." My knees went weak. The plane wasn't just off course, it was disappearing. Behind me, muffled through the cockpit door, I could hear it. Passengers screaming. The turbulence had luggage crashed from overhead bins. Oxygen masks dangled like nooses. And underneath it all, that same laughter I'd heard on the intercom, echoing through the cabin like it was coming from every direction at once. Daniels turned to me, desperate. "You have to get help. Someone who knows what the hell this is." I thought of Father Gabriel, the silver cross, his warning. "Yes," I whispered, "the priest." Before I could leave, Captain Hale's head snapped back violently. His mouth opened wider than any humans should, jaw cracking, lips tearing at the edges. From his throat came a sound like metal grinding against bone. Then something began to push out of him. At first, it looked like smoke seeping from his skin, curling in the dim light. But it thickened, twisting into tendrils of black that writhed around him. They scraped across the cockpit ceiling, leaving scorch marks where they touched. Daniel screamed. I covered my mouth, choking back terror. Captain Hale's eyes locked onto mine, glowing brighter now, blazing like coals. His voice thundered, shaking the walls. "You cannot stop the offering." I bolted, slamming the cockpit door behind me. The passengers were in chaos, some crying, some praying, some clawing at their seatbelts as if trying to escape. And in the middle of it all stood Father Gabriel, clutching his Bible, his face pale but resolute. I stumbled toward him, shaking. "It's true," I gasped. "It's not him. It's something else. The plane's not even responding to controls." He gripped my shoulders hard, his eyes blazing with conviction. "Listen to me," he said. "This is no storm, no malfunction. A demon rides your captain. It seeks souls, and it will not stop until this aircraft is a coffin in the sea." My breath hitched. "Then what do we do?" He lifted his cross, his voice steady despite the chaos. "We fight it, or we all die tonight." The plane groaned like a living beast, its fuselage rattling under unseen pressure. The emergency lights flickered red, strobing across terrified faces. People screamed, prayed, and clawed at each other. And through it all, that deep, mocking laughter seeped from the walls themselves, vibrating in my bones. Father Gabriel stood firm in the aisle, gripping his cross in one hand and the Bible in the other. He looked at me, his voice steady, even as the cabin swirled in chaos. "It's spreading," he said. "The entity has left the cockpit. It wants the others." I turned, and my stomach lurched. Passengers were convulsing in their seats. Some clawed at their faces as though trying to peel their skin away. Others screamed at things I couldn't see, batting at the air, their eyes wide with terror. A child wailed, pointing at the ceiling. And then I saw it too. Shapes, inhuman, elongated shadows slithered along the cabin walls, moving with jerks like broken marionettes. Their limbs were wrong, too long, bending backward, faces smooth and eyeless. They reached down toward the passengers, whispering in voices that weren't made of words, but of hunger. The smell hit me next. Burning iron, sulfur, and something foul, like rotting meat. I gagged, clutching the back of a seat for support. A man in row 12 suddenly rose, his eyes blank white. He screamed in a guttural voice, not his own, and lunged at a woman beside him, teeth bared. Others began thrashing, turning on their neighbors as if possessed. It was no longer just Marcus Hale. The demon had found cracks in all of us. Father Gabriel raised his voice, louder than the storm outside, louder than the screams. "In the name of Christ, leave these innocents." The shadows shrieked, the lights exploded, plunging us into semi-darkness, lit only by the strobing glow of lightning outside. Passengers shrank back as Gabriel walked down the aisle, chanting in Latin. Every word he spoke seemed to burn the shadows, making them hiss and recoil. I ran beside him, grabbing oxygen masks, pressing them into trembling hands, trying to stop people from tearing each other apart. But then came the voice again, deep, layered, impossible. It filled the intercom, the air, the very metal around us. "You cannot save them." The entire aircraft shuddered violently. Overhead bins flew open, luggage hurled through the air like weapons. A woman screamed as a suitcase smashed into her skull. Blood sprayed the seats. I screamed too, but Gabriel's chant never faltered. Suddenly, the cockpit door burst open on its own, slamming against the wall. And there was Marcus Hale, or what was left of him. He stumbled forward, his uniform torn, his skin blackened and splitting like burning wood. Tendrils of smoke and shadow poured from his mouth, his eyes glowing like molten gold. His arms stretched unnaturally, fingers elongating into claws that scraped the metal walls, leaving deep gouges. He staggered toward us, his voice booming like thunder. "This vessel is mine. These souls are mine. And you," his burning eyes locked on me, "you will lead them to me." I froze. My knees gave out. For a moment, I felt it, the pull. His voice wrapped around me like chains, tugging at something deep inside my chest. For a second, I wanted to obey, to walk to him, to surrender. "Look at me," Gabriel shouted. I turned. His eyes blazed with faith, unshaken. He thrust the silver cross into my hands. "Hold it," he commanded. I did. The metal burned cold against my palm, but it anchored me. I clutched it tight, raising it toward the thing that wore Marcus Hale's body. The demon snarled, its skin blistering where the cross's faint light touched. Gabriel's voice thundered now, filling the cabin. He shouted the rite of exorcism, his words ringing against the unnatural howl. Passengers screamed, some collapsing, some praying louder. The cabin felt like it was tearing apart between two forces. The lights flickered violently, then steadied. The demon lunged. I stumbled back, but Gabriel stepped forward, fearless. He pressed the cross against the captain's chest. There was a sound like steam hissing, then a deafening roar. The shadows recoiled, thrashing wildly as if torn from the walls. The glass windows cracked, lightning flashing brighter than ever. Hale's body convulsed, arching unnaturally. His mouth opened, and a torrent of black smoke poured out, twisting, shrieking. The sound shattered the overhead lights, plunging us into near darkness except for the glow of the cross. "Go back to the pit!" Gabriel roared. The smoke writhed, screaming as it was dragged upward, out of Hale's body, out of the cabin, sucked toward some invisible rift above us. The howling wind tore at everything, but I held the cross high, screaming with Gabriel's words, though I barely understood them. And then, silence. Just the hum of the engines. Captain Hale collapsed to the floor, his body broken, twitching. His eyes returned to normal, bloodshot, human, but lifeless. The passengers wept, gasped, clung to each other. Some lay unconscious, others injured, but they were alive. Gabriel slumped into a seat, clutching his Bible, sweat pouring down his face. He looked at me and gave a weak smile. "You see now," he said, "there are wars not of this world. Tonight, you were drafted into one." I swallowed hard, trembling all over. "But we're safe now." He didn't answer. Hours later, under emergency guidance from ground control, the plane landed at a military base. The survivors were escorted out, dazed, bloodied, half believing they were still in a nightmare. As paramedics rushed in, I looked once more at the cockpit, at Hale's body, covered by a sheet, and I swore I saw the fabric rise, as though something inside still breathed. Days later, investigators combed the wreck of the plane, recording T. I gave mine, shaking, still unable to sleep. Gabriel's words echoed in my mind. Wars not of this world. But then I overheard something. A technician speaking quietly, pale as chalk. "The black box recorded the cockpit during the incident," he said. "But it's wrong." "What do you mean?" someone asked. He swallowed hard. "The pilot, he's still chanting, even after his heart stopped. The voice is still on the recording, even now." My blood froze. And that night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I dreamed of the captain's glowing eyes staring at me through the darkness and laughing.
If you like this story, then you should listen to this chilling story.
When I was 29, I had already been an air hostess for nearly 8 years. Flying was my life. I had joined a major international airline right after college, eager for adventure. My friends envied me. Glamorous uniforms, exotic destinations, a new city every week. But behind the makeup and polite smiles, the job was grueling. Long hours, jet lag, difficult passengers, and the constant loneliness of being away from home. I wasn't married. I didn't even have a steady boyfriend. The closest thing to family I had were the other crew members I flew with. Sometimes we bonded quickly, like soldiers in a war zone, but often we were shuffled so much that connections rarely lasted. Despite the exhaustion, I loved the skies. I loved the sound of the engines roaring during takeoff, the sight of clouds stretching endlessly, the sensation of being between worlds. Up there, life felt suspended. Nothing could touch me. At least, that's what I believed. Until Flight 237. It was a red-eye from New York to Lisbon, one of those overnight flights no one really enjoys. The passengers were a mix of tired business people, restless students, and a few families with cranky children. My fellow crew included Marco, a kind Italian attendant I'd flown with twice before, and Lisa, a new hire on her very first transatlantic. From the start, the flight felt wrong. The boarding process was chaotic. Several passengers looked pale, ill even, and one older man in a gray coat avoided my eyes when I checked his boarding pass. He muttered something under his breath in a language I didn't recognize. As we ascended into the night sky, I felt a chill settle in the cabin. Normally, I enjoyed the calm of dimmed lights and sleeping passengers. But this time, the air seemed heavy, oppressive. During service, I noticed things that unsettled me. The man in the gray coat never spoke, never touched his meal, just stared ahead, lips moving faintly. A child pointed at him once, whispering to his mother, "He's scary," but she hushed him quickly. When I passed his seat later, I swear his eyes followed me, not just turned toward me, but locked on me, unblinking, as though he saw more than he should. Halfway across the Atlantic, something strange happened. I was walking the aisle, checking seatbelts, when I felt a hand brush mine. I turned, startled, but no one had reached out. The passenger beside me was asleep, breathing heavily. When I glanced back at the galley, I saw the gray-coated man standing there, though he should have been seated. My stomach dropped. I walked quickly toward him, my professional smile plastered on. "Sir, please return to your seat," I said. He tilted his head, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "You don't belong here," he whispered. His voice was low, rasping, almost like the sound of static. I froze. "Excuse me?" Before I could react, Marco appeared behind me, his presence solid and reassuring. "Everything okay?" I turned back, but the man was gone, vanished. "Where?" I stammered. Marco frowned. "Who?" I tried to explain, but he shook his head. "Everyone's asleep. You're just tired." But I knew what I had seen. The rest of the flight spiraled into a nightmare. Strange noises echoed through the cabin, soft tapping like fingernails on glass, though no one stirred. The intercom crackled, spitting fragments of words that weren't ours. Once I heard my own name whispered through it. Lisa, the new hire, grew pale and withdrawn. She whispered to me in the galley. I saw someone standing by the emergency exit. But when I looked again, no one was there. Passengers began to stir restlessly, complaining of bad dreams. A woman insisted she saw a man crouching in the aisle, staring at her with glowing eyes. And always, I felt his gaze, the man in the gray coat. Sometimes I saw him sitting where he had been, sometimes at the back of the plane, sometimes reflected in the darkened windows. But when anyone else looked, the seat was empty. By the time we began our descent into Lisbon, I was trembling with exhaustion and fear. The passengers seemed dazed, shuffling off the plane like sleepwalkers. I hoped that once we landed, the nightmare would end. I was wrong. We stayed in a crew hotel in Lisbon, a charming old building with narrow hallways and flickering lights. Normally, after a long flight, I would collapse into bed. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of the man's whisper gnawed at me. "You don't belong here." At 3 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. Relieved, I thought it was Lisa, perhaps just as shaken as I was. I opened it. No one was there. The hallway stretched empty, shadows deep in the corners. I was about to close the door when I saw it, a scrap of paper on the floor. I picked it up. Written in neat, spidery handwriting were the words, "You can't escape the skies." I dropped the note, my hands shaking. When I looked up, at the far end of the hall, the man in the gray coat stood beneath the flickering light. He lifted his hands slowly, pointing directly at me. I slammed the door shut and bolted it. Sleep was impossible after that. The next night, we were scheduled to return to New York. I considered faking an illness, refusing to fly, but I knew it would only delay the inevitable. So I boarded, my hands trembling as I greeted passengers. Everything seemed normal at first, until midway through the flight, when Lisa screamed. I rushed down the aisle. She was standing frozen, eyes wide, pointing at the empty seat where the man in the gray coat had sat before. "He was there," she sobbed. "He was right there." The passengers stirred uneasily. Marco tried to calm them, but the tension in the cabin was unbearable. Lights flickered, turbulence rocked the plane, though the skies were clear, and whispers filled the air, 1,000 voices murmuring words I couldn't understand. Then I saw him, standing in the aisle, closer than ever. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, I saw them clearly. Black, endless, like two holes in the world. "You should never have flown," he whispered. "The skies are mine." The world tilted. The cabin spun. Passengers screamed as overhead bins burst open, luggage spilling. Oxygen masks dropped without warning. And then, nothing. Darkness, silence. I awoke in my hotel room, drenched in sweat. My heart pounded. Had it all been a dream? I stumbled to the window. The city stretched below, normal, alive. I turned and froze. On the table by my bed lay another note. "You never landed." My breath caught. The walls seemed to ripple, shadows deepening. I stumbled to the mirror, clutching the dresser for balance. But the reflection staring back wasn't mine. It was his, the man in the gray coat. He smiled. And then the lights went out. I don't know where I am now. Sometimes I see the inside of a plane, endless rows of seats filled with shadowy figures. Sometimes I'm in hotel rooms that shift and change. I never see the ground, never feel the earth. I think I'm still flying. And sometimes, when I look out the window, I see a reflection in the glass. A woman in uniform, pale and hollow-eyed, staring back at me. It's me. I was an air hostess. My name was, I don't remember anymore. All I know is what the man whispered again and again as the engines roared and the world dissolved into darkness. "You don't belong here. You never did."
Now that you know what happened there, let me tell you about another chilling encounter.
I was 30 years old when Flight 721 disappeared. For most of my adult life, the skies had been my home. I was an air hostess with Orion Air, 8 years into the job, long enough to be broken in, but not so long that I had lost the charm of it. People on the ground thought it was glamorous. Crisp uniforms, red lipstick, foreign cities stamped into a passport. They never saw the exhaustion, the lonely hotel rooms, the 12-hour shifts with a smile pasted on. The jet lag that made your body feel like it belonged to someone else. And yet, despite it all, I loved flying. I loved that sense of existing between two worlds, neither here nor there, neither grounded nor free. Up in the cabin, the hum of the engines was like a heartbeat. It made me feel both small and infinite at once. October 12th was supposed to be routine. Boston to Reykjavik, a 6-hour transatlantic hop on a Boeing 737. I'd worked the route many times. The captain was James Keane, a man with more than 20 years of flying under his belt. Calm, composed, a voice that could steady a storm of panicked passengers. The first officer was Darren Reeves, younger, eager, but with that nervous energy I never trusted in a pilot. I didn't know then that James and I would be the only ones to survive that night. I didn't know then what I would do or what I would become. We boarded late. Passengers trickled in. Tired businessmen in suits, restless students with earbuds in, a middle-aged couple already arguing softly about their hotel booking, and an elderly Icelandic woman who clutched a rosary so tightly I thought it might snap. From the moment the cabin doors closed, the atmosphere felt different, heavy. During boarding, I noticed a sound beneath the engines, not quite mechanical, not air pressure or hydraulics, a low vibration that seemed to hum directly through my chest, like the resonance of a cello string. At first, I thought it was me, just fatigue, stress, but the sound stayed. The elderly woman began whispering prayers, her rosary beads clacking like teeth. She looked past me as though she saw something I couldn't. It unsettled me more than I cared to admit. Takeoff was smooth. The 737 rose into the night, lights of Boston shrinking into a blur. Once we leveled, I began the routine, safety demonstrations, meal service, checking belts. I moved down the aisle, smiling at passengers who looked half asleep already. But I couldn't shake it, the hum inside my chest, steady and insistent. It didn't sound in my ears, it pulsed in my bones. Passengers grew restless sooner than usual. Some twitched, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared into nothing, lips moving as if in silent conversation. The elderly woman prayed louder, rocking back and forth. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" I asked gently. She clutched my arm with surprising strength, her eyes wild. "We are not in the world anymore," she hissed in broken English. "He comes for us." I tried to calm her, but her words lingered like a stain. At 2:07 a.m., the cabin lights flickered. The intercom crackled. I pressed the crew call button. "Cockpit, this is Rachel," I said, voice steady despite the knot in my throat. "Is everything all right?" A pause, then Captain Keen's voice, calm but clipped. "We're experiencing some anomalies. Nothing for the passengers to worry about. Just keep things calm back there." Anomalies, the word chilled me. An hour later, whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers pointed at the windows, pale faces pressed to the glass. I looked too, and froze. The stars outside weren't right. I knew the sky. After years of red eyes, I had memorized constellations, traced familiar points of light across the Atlantic routes. But these stars were wrong. Clusters I'd never seen. A violent ribbon of violet light slicing across the blackness like a wound in the... One student muttered, that's not possible. A businessman asked me if we had veered north, if this was some polar aurora. I didn't answer, because my mouth had gone dry. Then the first man collapsed. He was in row 14, mid-40s, laptop still open. One moment he was breathing heavily, the next he convulsed violently, foam bubbling at his lips. His seatmates screamed. I rushed forward, training kicking in, trying chest compressions, CPR, anything. But when I looked into his eyes, my blood froze. They weren't eyes anymore. They were black, endless voids, swallowing light. He went still, dead, and the hum in my chest grew louder. What happened next, I can't explain in any way that makes sense. The passengers were panicking, screams rising. I should have comforted them, ordered calm, but I didn't. Instead, I stood, and I walked the aisle. My hands moved without command. When I touched a man's shoulder, his scream cut short. His eyes turned black, his body slumped. When I leaned close to a woman, sobbing against the window, her skin went pale, then nothing. She was gone. Gone. Not dead. Gone. Seat by seat, row by row, I moved through them, as though guided by the hum inside me. Their lives drained, their bodies flickered out of existence, swallowed by some force that moved through me. And the worst part? I didn't resist. It felt right. The elderly woman was the last. She pressed her rosary against my arm, and the crucifix burned. For a moment, I came back to myself. My own voice slipped out, raw and broken. "I'm sorry." Then I pressed her down, and she vanished. Silence fell. The plane was empty. I was the only one left. The intercom crackled. "Rachel," Captain Keen's voice. "Captain," I whispered, throat tight. "I saw it," he said quietly. "From the cockpit cameras. They disappeared. Every single one of them. And you're still here." Tears burned my eyes. "I didn't mean to. I couldn't stop it." "It wasn't just you," he said grimly. "I saw more than that. When they vanished, something stayed behind. It's in the cabin with you, right now." I spun. The aisle stretched empty, but shadows pooled unnaturally along the seats. They shifted, too deep, too long, as if shapes pressed against a thin veil. Limbs, fingers, faces without form. "Rachel," Keen said, urgent now. "Get to the cockpit, now." I stumbled forward, heart pounding, shadows whispering at my heels. When the cockpit door opened, Keen yanked me inside and slammed it shut. The cockpit windows showed not the Atlantic night, but something else entirely. A void, a vast swirling abyss streaked with violet lightning. The horizon was gone. The stars were wrong. And then, movement. Something stirred in that darkness. A shape larger than the plane, larger than anything I could imagine. Not solid, but writhing, infinite, with countless black eyes opening and closing across its shifting form. Each eye focused on us. Keen whispered, "God help us." The controls flickered. Alarms screamed. The plane jolted, dropping violently. "We're losing everything," Keen shouted, wrestling with the yoke. "No navigation, no instruments, nothing." The Boeing plunged into the abyss. The hum inside me roared, so loud I thought my skull would split. Without thinking, I pressed my hand against the instrument pedal. Light burst through me, not mine, but theirs. The passengers, the shadows, the thing outside. For a moment, impossibly, I felt as though I was holding the entire plane in the air. Keen gaped. "Rachel, what are you?" The abyss swallowed us, and then nothing. I awoke on a rocky shoreline at dawn. Wreckage smoldered around me. Twisted metal, torn seat cushions, fragments of fuselage. The sea stretched endless and gray. I was alive, unscathed. No passengers, no crew, no sign of Keen. For 3 days I wandered that shoreline before a fishing vessel found me. At the hospital, officials questioned me endlessly. What happened to Flight 721? How had I survived? Why was there no wreckage on radar, no black box, no bodies? I told them I didn't remember, that I blacked out. But in my dreams, I still heard the hum. Weeks later, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to. The captain had survived too, James Keen. They found him washed ashore miles from me, broken but alive. But his mind wasn't intact. He muttered about the eyes in the dark, about shadows pressing through the cabin. He swore he had seen me glowing in the cockpit, feeding the plane with whatever had taken the passengers. Before they could question him properly, he vanished. The hospital cameras glitched. Nurses reported a figure standing beside his bed, tall, faceless, draped in shadows. Then James was gone. No one has seen him since. And me? I walk through life pretending to be normal. But at night, when everything is still, I feel the hum beneath my skin, growing louder. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, my eyes darken at the edges, pulsing faintly. And I know Flight 721 didn't disappear. It was claimed. The question is, why did it leave me behind? For now?
If you thought that story was scary, wait until you hear this next one.
I was 28, working as an air hostess for Skyward Airlines. I'd been flying for 6 years, and in all that time, I'd learned to handle tantrums, turbulence, and even medical emergencies. But nothing could prepare me for what happened on Flight 492. It was a night flight from New York to Paris, a Boeing 737 packed with late-evening business travelers, families, and tourists trying to catch the city lights before they slept. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The captain that night was Peter Ward, a man in his late 40s with a reputation for being precise and unshakable. His co-pilot, Claire, was young, nervous, but competent. I'd worked with Peter before, and he always exuded confidence, calmness, a sense that nothing in the sky could surprise him. But this time, something was wrong. From the moment I met him at the gate, Peter's presence felt off. His eyes were restless, darting to the ceiling, to the walls, like he was listening to voices I couldn't hear. He shook hands with the crew, smiled politely, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was a rigidity to him, a tautness that made me uneasy. Among the passengers was an unusual man, seated in row 7, an elderly priest named Father Donovan. He carried a small leather Bible, wore a silver crucifix around his neck, and kept muttering prayers under his breath. His gaze was calm, but piercing, as if he could see the dark truths of the world. When I handed him a blanket, He looked at me with a strange intensity. "Something is wrong tonight," he said softly. "Watch the captain. Be vigilant." I smiled awkwardly, brushing it off as superstition. But the moment I walked away, a chill ran down my spine. Takeoff was smooth, the engines roared, and the city lights of New York shrank beneath us. Passengers settled into their seats, some working on laptops, some watching in-flight entertainment, some drifting into sleep. But 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed the first sign that something was terribly wrong. The turbulence began suddenly, violently, yet the night sky outside was completely clear. There were no storm clouds, no turbulence reports, nothing to justify the violent shaking of the plane. Drinks spilled, luggage tumbled from the bins, and passengers screamed. The intercom crackled. Peter's voice came over, but it wasn't reassuring this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, everything is fine. Relax, relax." The words were hollow, mechanical, unnatural. He was speaking in a tone I didn't recognize as human. My stomach knotted. When I peeked into the cockpit, I saw Peter's hands resting in his lap, not on the yoke. The autopilot wasn't engaged, yet the plane moved as if invisible hands were controlling it. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the instrument panel. Something inhuman lurked behind his gaze. I ran back to the cabin, heart hammering. Passengers were panicking. Some were screaming, others clinging desperately to seatbelts. A child pointed at the ceiling, crying, and I followed his gaze and froze. Shadows. Long black shadows slithered along the overhead bins and walls, twisting unnaturally. Their forms were humanoid but grotesque, with limbs bending the wrong way, faces smooth and featureless, and eyes that glowed faint red. They whispered in a language I didn't understand, a chorus of malice that crawled into my ears and chest. The shadows moved toward the passengers, who began convulsing, screaming, and clawing at each other. Some looked like they were possessed, their eyes going black as the shadows crept over them. I stumbled back, nearly falling, and met Father Donovan's gaze. He raised his cross and shouted, "In the name of God, resist!" I knew what I had to do. I had to confront Peter. I had to stop whatever was controlling him before more passengers died. With Father Donovan at my side, I charged toward the cockpit. The door swung open before I could knock. Peter stood there, tall, his body twitching unnaturally. His mouth opened, and a black smoke-like substance poured from it. Tendrils of darkness snaked out, reaching toward us, curling around the cockpit controls. "Stay back!" Father Donovan shouted, brandishing his Bible and cross. Peter's voice boomed, multiple tones at once, overlapping, terrifying. "This plane, these souls, all mine." The plane lurched violently, as if the darkness itself was trying to shake us off. I felt the tendrils of smoke press against me, cold and burning at the same time. I screamed and threw my body forward, knocking the tendrils aside. Father Donovan began chanting in Latin. His voice rang through the cockpit, strong, commanding, filling the space with power I could feel in my bones. Peter screamed, thrashing, his body twisting impossibly. The black tendrils writhed, trying to resist the holy words. I grabbed the captain's arms, holding him as firmly as I could, and Father Donovan pressed the cross to his forehead. The shadows recoiled violently. A high-pitched shriek filled the cabin as the darkness began to lift, peeling away from Peter and dissipating into the air. His body went limp. For a moment, all was silent, except for the roar of the engines. The passengers, still terrified, looked around in disbelief. Most were unharmed physically, though shaken beyond words. Peter collapsed into the co-pilot's seat, breathing heavily, eyes wide, but now human. We landed safely in Paris, the emergency crews waiting on the tarmac. Passengers were escorted off, many too shaken to speak. Some whispered about shadows, about shapes in the cabin, but most assumed it was panic and stress. Peter was taken away for medical evaluation. He claimed to remember nothing, but the haunted look in his eyes said otherwise. "Evil doesn't only dwell in haunted places," he said quietly. "It can reach anywhere, even the skies." I nodded, still trembling, clutching the silver cross he had given me. I returned to my job after a week off, but nothing felt the same. Every flight now carries a shadow of fear, a constant reminder that what happened on Flight 492 was no accident. I never fly without thinking of Peter's glowing eyes, the black smoke, and the shadows moving among the passengers. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear whispers in the cabin, faint and distant, calling from the darkness. And I know that somewhere up there, the skies are never truly empty.